Happy New Year, same 24 hours podcast. Listeners, it's an amazing 2020 already, and I hope you all are feeling great on New Year's Day. I know many of you are not, which is why I am bringing you just the perfect remedy for your New Year's Day, and that is the amazing Pilar Gerasimo. She is an award-winning health journalist, but you probably know her for her Experience Life magazine. She was a founding editor, and she also has a podcast called The Living Experiment, which is a top podcast with Dallas Hartwig, who is the co-founder of Whole30. And I have loved her podcast for years and was so honored when she agreed to be my New Year's Day guest. So hooray. Her new book, The Healthy Deviant, A Rule Breaker's Guide to Being Healthy in an Unhealthy World, is available now for pre-order and comes out next week. So you don't want to miss out. I was so thrilled to not only speak to her, but to hear about the topic of this book. You're going to love it. So Happy New Year. Welcome to it. It's a year of being healthy deviants. And it's most definitely a year of no nonsense. So my book is out. The last podcast I did was about publication day. So I'm 2 weeks in now. Everything is going amazingly well. I'm a #1 bestseller on Amazon and in many categories: women's health, general women's health, and even self-esteem. I'm bopping around, and the book's available in Target nationwide. And so it's been a pretty awesome start for me. And I know you all are going to really enjoy this episode with Pilar. So I hope it goes great. I hope that your new year is set up to be everything that you're hoping. But if it's not, we can do better. There's always an opportunity to change exactly what you want to change. So let's look at 2020 as opportunity to move forward in the direction that we want to go. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, and welcome to the Same 24 Hours podcast. I'm Meredith Atwood, author of the book, The Year of No Nonsense. I'm a former attorney turned writer, speaker, and Ironman triathlete. Although right now, all I really like to do is lift weights. We all have the same 24 hours, but it's what we do in those hours that leads to our greatest health, happiness, and success. It's my goal to crack the code on a life of less nonsense so we can all make the most of our 24 hours. So let's get started. Today's guest is Pilar Gerasimo, correct? Did I get it wrong again?
Yeah. No, Gerasimo, that's right. I always tell people it's like Seymour, but with a Gera on the front. So Gerasimo.
I asked you how to pronounce it, and then I said it wrong. See, that's the kind of genius I am. So anyway, thank you for being here.
That's my pleasure.
So let's talk quickly, at first, about your new book, because I'm very excited about this. It keeps popping up on Amazon for me to buy, and I'm going to buy it as soon as I get off the phone because I know it's coming out for you soon, and pre-orders are super important because I just did this song and dance for my own book. But Healthy Deviant, The Rule Breaker's Guide to Being Healthy in an Unhealthy World. So let's talk about this.
Okay, we will talk about it. And then I also just want to say congratulations on your book, because that I've seen popping up on Amazon too. And it's always so fun to talk to someone else who's just been through the same crazy rodeo of getting a book out. I feel like it's been, 5 years of work just getting it really together, and probably to a decade of thinking about it. So,
and this is the crazy time, because 1 week you can do, it's crazy making, because it's 1 week and you can't do anything. It's like you need to do stuff, but what can you do? Buy my book. So I know how you feel right now. That's all I'll say.
It's great. I will say that there's something, so what's been happening for me as the book, after I got it submitted probably in the spring originally, I think it was May, it's been this kind of gathering sense of oh my goodness, this is going to go out into the world. People, regular humans, are going to open this book and read it. And, reflecting on what I'd originally intended when I set out to write it in the first place, and measuring in my own mind, I guess my hope of what the book will do for folks who read it, and the potential that it'll land really differently for some people and not others. I mean, if you write a book that's titled The Healthy Deviant, you know that it's not for everyone to begin with. But what I've been finding as advanced readers have been giving me feedback is that it is really connecting with health seekers in the way that I had originally hoped and intended. And so no matter what happens to the book's sales, I feel like I have achieved what I wanted to with the book, which is changing some lives and changing some minds and reframing the real challenge of what it means to try to be a healthy person in today's world, which is so much more predominantly unhealthy and unhappy. I feel ultimately, if there's anything that I have been called to do with the past 2 decades of my career, it's to make that challenge easier for people and help them approach it with more self-compassion and patience and, enthusiasm. I want it to feel better than it does for most people. So I'm really grateful for the chance to talk about it with you, because I know you're a change agent and someone who's been advocating for the same kinds of healthy changes and wanting to encourage people to take those first steps, which are sometimes the most difficult.
Right. And I think it's so interesting. You said, with a title like The Healthy Deviant, this book is not for everyone. I keep saying the same thing about my book. I'm like, it's not going to be for everyone. But when you get it out into the world and that the book is exactly what you intended and it's also received well, I feel like I can finally breathe a little because it's been 2 weeks and I'm like, okay, I've gotten my fair share of other, not so great reviews, but they're kind of in the shadows right now. But when you finish that project and say this is what I intended, it's a great feeling. So congratulations on getting there, because it could be much worse, right? Say, oh no, I messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny when I was talking to Dallas, my podcast partner. So I have a podcast called The Living Experiment that I co-host with Dallas Hartwig. And Dallas is a 2 times New York Times bestselling author of The Whole30, and it starts with food. And he has a new book coming out called The 4-Season Solution. The two of us have been working on our books at the same time. And in the year that we took off from the podcast to finish our books, he witnessed me going through the cycle of, what I wanted the book to be versus what the publisher wanted it to be. And there really is a machine that is set up to produce books for the health and fitness industry that start to look and sound a lot alike. They have recipes, they have workouts, they have diets, they have miracle programs that are going to, reform you in some magical way and solve all of your problems. And I think in the podcast that we were recording when we came back, he asked me a few questions about what the experience was like of finishing it finally. And I burst into tears spontaneously and describing it because it was so hard to stay true to the truth, of what I wanted to share with people and not make it into something that other people expected it to be. And what I found out is that in my own health seeking and as a health journalist, so much of what passes for good advice or conventionally acceptable health and fitness advice is really all the same diet and exercise, workout, eat less, burn more kind of counsel. And it works against most people, I think, more than it helps. And at least that's been my observation. And the statistics on this are on my side, that most people who go on diets not only don't stay on them, but aren't helped by them. They lose weight, they immediately gain back, and often they injure themselves or their metabolism in the process. And I think the same thing is true. A lot of times people dive into over-aggressive exercise programs before their bodies are really ready for it. And they end up injuring themselves or just getting exhausted and finding that they don't enjoy exercise. They don't want to do it anymore. And so this book, I guess I really set out to give people an alternative way of approaching their health and fitness improvement efforts and really reframing them so that they start with the understanding that what's been keeping them unhealthy and unhappy, or what has been holding them back from making the healthy changes they want to make, is not some failure of willpower or moral fortitude on their part. It's that we're all living in the same unhealthy culture. And it's a culture that makes it massively more easy to be unhealthy and unhappy than it does healthy and happy. And I think that context is really important and at the essence of my book. And if there's one thing that makes it very different than most books, it's this pretty consistent focus on remembering the context in which you are trying to make these changes. So I share a lot of science and statistical insights about how and why that is important. In terms of the influences, unconscious and conscious, the incentives that are at work, and the unhealthy default choices that are constantly surrounding you. So when you go to make a change in, say, your eating or your activity or your sleep or your social connection, doing it in a way that acknowledges the almost impossible environment that you're doing it in, and giving yourself credit for that, and learning from the obstacles that come your way rather than being defeated by them. We'll talk a little bit, I hope, about the unhealthy default reality, but to me, it's really like, remember the context in which you are trying to make these changes, because if you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. I don't want anybody to do that.
I totally see where you're coming from now. I mean, that is, yes, yeah. I wrote down brilliant. I wrote down brilliant because for you to say, the publisher wanted it to be this way and this way, but you're so right. You are framing this in a way that feels so amazing. And I've read Experience Life magazine for many years, and it has like that sort of theme about I think revolutionary, and it's escaping me now, but being revolutionary, healthy, being, what it is.
Yeah.
I'm losing it.
Being healthy, it's a revolutionary act.
Yeah.
No, that's it. You got it.
And so,
being healthy is a revolutionary act. That was the tagline for the magazine for years. Yeah.
And so, yes, I was in Target with my daughter, and she said, let's go look at the Christmas clearance section. I'm like, oh, great, let's do it. And all the junk food that was on clearance, and I'm sitting here trying to get my back on my healthy eating to feel good, because I feel like garbage since Thanksgiving. And I'm looking at the Target clearance aisle, and it's like Christmas threw up, it's just everywhere. And but the candy, the cookies, and my daughter's like, I want a reindeer cookie. And I'm thinking, what shot do we have to raise healthy human beings in this world? It feels so difficult. So the fact that you're focusing your book on how we can do this, and to remember that the odds are stacked against us, I think that is so brilliant. So I'm excited. That made me so happy.
Well, thank you. And that's a really great example of how our environment is constantly triggering unhealthy desires and cravings. And the other part that a lot of people don't see is how that same environment is constantly wearing us down. All of the media, all of the attention that we have on all these digital devices and screens. And, most environments, there are 2 or 3 screens within a site at any given time, and multiple sounds coming across from various broadcasts or speaker systems or your own devices. And you're rushing, and you're trying to accomplish more in a given day than you possibly can, and you're not really connecting with your loved ones in the ways that help to replenish you, and you're not sleeping. So all of these things, the blue lights, the massively overstimulating environment, also wears us down, and it depletes our cognitive capacity, it depletes our resilience, and it leaves us kind of unconscious in an environment. If you're unconscious, you're, again, even more vulnerable to not knowing why you suddenly had a crazy craving for French fries or a Cinnabon, except that you just walked past the smell in the mall or on the street. And now,
and Cinnabon,
oh, I know, it's so cruel.
The worst.
But these are really good. But it's real. Like, it is designed to do what it does. And that's, we can laugh about, the cinnamon, and it reminds me of grandma. That smell is so appetizing. But it's been designed to appeal to our bodies and minds, and to 2.5 million years of genetic evolution, that our bodies are programmed to want the densest possible forms of energetic value of calories, but sugars and salts and fats. And when you combine them, our poor, central nervous system is no match for that, even at its best. But when you combine that with the overwhelm and the depletion and the overstimulation, people are really at a very big disadvantage. And I talk about some funny research. It's not funny, it's kind of scary, but some of the research that's been done on what they call ego depletion. And this is the sense that you have being less capable or more worn down and not having as much willpower as you did, say, at the start of the day, most people have a sense of control and willpower. And by the end of the day, most people are pretty worn out. But they've done research to show that this happens in some pretty fun lab environments. So when they, for example, bring people in to a study environment, they'll have, in one study, like a bunch of chocolate chip cookies that are freshly baked out and that smell really good. And they tell the people not to eat them. And they're like, hey, like they make something up, like, hey, those are for a different experiment, so you can't eat them. And then people are confronted with this chocolate chip cookie smell. And then they put them in this lab environment where they have them take some kind of a mental challenge, like do a math test or a sorting exercise. And what they show is, based on the control group that hasn't been exposed to the warm, yummy chocolate chip smells, the people who have been do much less well on the stress test or the cognitive test than the people who are not exposed to that smell. So just resisting the chocolate chip smell causes a kind of cognitive depletion, or what's known as ego depletion, the rational mind's, the egoic mind's ability to make a decision and stick to it. But what's really interesting is that it also works the other way around. They've done other studies where they give people really complicated tests or math sorting or whatever, like a cognitive demand test, and then expose them to tempting foods. And sure enough, if you have enough mental stress, resisting a tempting food becomes much more difficult. You're much less likely to be able to do it. But these are the circumstances that we're living in and day out in this culture. Huge amounts of temptation combined with huge amounts of chronic stress. And in that unrelenting combination, that environment, it's a miracle that we make healthy decisions as often as we do, but that we beat ourselves up for the times that we think we fail. And that really only adds to the stress and that cycle of ego depletion. I call it the vicious cycle of the unhealthy default reality. And it really is a predictable recipe for disaster.
Yes. So like when I travel now, I bring my food, like all my meals, I pack them in containers and I take them. And this is for a wide variety of reasons, but a lot of it is because I got to the point where I would find myself actually angry in an airport or in a grocery store, because I just couldn't find the simplest things that I'm not intolerant to, or that did not have gluten, and I just wanted something.
Totally.
And so now people say, well, I don't want to take my food on trips, and I'm like, well, knock yourself out. But I do, because it's unsafe out there, people. It's unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it really is. And it's, what you've just described is a really good example of a healthy deviant strategy, a coping strategy, or a kind of self-defense strategy that allows you to maintain your own healthy, self-preserving choices in the face of some pretty significant obstacles. And that demands time and energy and know-how on your part. And you learned, I suspect, through long experimentation, that not doing it was more problematic than doing it. And that's why you do it, even though it is a pain in the butt. And it's a shame you have to do it. But that's a great example of a healthy deviant skill.
And it's interesting, like, I guess I am a sort of deviant in a way. Yay, me. But, I have not been able to be a very intuitive eater. I've dealt with an eating issue my whole life, and I am 4 years sober, so I was a drinker. And so I've had a lot of issues with just overdoing life in general. And so for me, being a meal planner where I know what I eat every day down to the gram, some people like to push that as that's unhealthy, eating disorder, that it's orthorexia in some way. And I'm like, no, this is what makes me healthy. This is where I can control. Yeah. And it does have a control piece to it. But in a world where we can't control much, I don't think planning what I eat is necessarily a bad thing to control, And so I get a lot from that. And I think, wait a minute, if I can't control what I'm actually putting in my body, what do people want me to control? I don't understand. And so that is a way that I'm a healthy deviant, is I just try and control the little piece of the world I can.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for saying that and sharing that about yourself. I think it's really important for people to experiment until they find the strategies that work for them. For someone else, what you just described could be an unhealthy set of
Right.
behaviors, but for you, they work. And the fact that they work and they give you the energy and vitality and clarity and confidence to do what you want to do with your life and put your attention where you want to put it, that's great. It's like bright line eating for some people is super helpful, and for others, it's really dysfunctional. You kind of got to figure it out by trying it and seeing what happens, not just to your body, but also to your mind. Do you become obsessive, or does it free you? That's really what it comes down to. For a lot
That's
of
a good
people, it's like,
point.
oh, I don't have to think about it anymore. I don't worry
Yes.
about it at all.
That's exactly
For
how
other
I
people,
put
it's like,
meal planning is freedom,
yeah,
because I'm
yeah,
not using the mental space of, oh, how can I have this? Can I have this? Is this going to make me not feel, so it is freedom. Yeah.
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 And I think the same thing is true of intuitive eating. For certain people, that is a strategy that is very rewarding, works really well for them. And I think for particularly at a certain point in your cycle as a healthy eater, it can be easier to do that and have confidence. You know what makes you sick, what doesn't. You know what's a craving and what's not. But I think for a lot of people, when they just throw themselves into intuitive eating from a place of a pretty disordered set of eating behaviors and not really knowing what is in the food that they're eating, it's difficult for them to discern between a healthy craving or a kind of a swerve off of a normal eating pattern for the fun of it and the joy of it, and because whatever, you need copper in your diet today, or if it's really like something is getting to you and you're just in a reaction that's not so healthy for you or not sustainable for you over time. So yeah, I mean, there's it's interesting. Like I said, there is no diet in this book, and I've really tried hard to have it be inclusive. And whether you're vegan or paleo and a tightly regimented eater or a very freewheeling one, I think most of the counsel in there is universally helpful. But I do think that it's important to learn over time what works for you and your personal body mind, based not just on your personality but your health status. What works for you now might not work for you if you're diagnosed with cancer. What works for you now might not work for you when you're 65 or when you have a baby or when you go to school. So I think that it's almost like we're going out into the wilderness, and there's a series of circumstances we can't predict, and we're going to have to be flexible in how we approach them over the course of our lifetime and our changing circumstances. So it's great that you found something that's working well for you now. That's a victory.
It does, until I just don't do the thing. But that's what I come back to. When I go off into, oh, I can just eat whatever, I realize that typically what is going on is it's the Target clearance aisle. Something like that has changed my happy self-defense, I think is what you called it, self-defense strategy. Yeah. And I've allowed, it's the external that I've let in. And that's really interesting.
It's so great. You almost perfectly just nailed the 3 nonconformist competencies of healthy deviance in what I call in one sentence. So the first thing you talked about was, you realized that's awareness. And I think amplified awareness, a higher than average level of awareness, is like the first competency of a healthy deviant. You start to notice and become aware of what is triggering you and what both inside you, like my mood today, or outside me, like the Target clearance table or the smell of a Cinnabon, or like everyone is having chicken wings and beers. I want to do, like you become aware what's triggering, and also what was working or not working for you. Like you said, you're intolerant to gluten, noticing that when you eat it, you get sick. That's a really important competency. So that's one you mentioned. The other thing you mentioned was like knowing what you need to do to take care of yourself, to get back into the system or the approach that replenishes and works for you. For a lot of people, they're so worn down and broken down chronically. It's been a long time since they've felt fully revitalized and replenished and repaired. But the second nonconformist competency of healthy deviance, as I see it, is preemptive repair. So you get ahead of the damage that's done to you by virtue of living in an unhealthy culture. And when you notice that you're run down and depleted or reactive or overwhelmed, and that something is like you're starting to behave in unhealthy ways, you take some preemptive, proactive steps to get yourself back into a healthy place. And for a lot of people, that's about eating before you're ravenously hungry, or drinking water before you're really dehydrated, or lying down for a nap or taking a rest before you're totally exhausted. And when you do that, you really do stay ahead of the crazy making stuff that most of us do when we are hungry, thirsty, tired, stressed out. That's when we fall off whatever program has been working for us, and we just throw all caution to the wind and we make ourselves totally ill. And then we rest after we're sick. Once we're in the hospital or we've been diagnosed with an illness, like autoimmune disorders are like so on the rise because of this, and people finally have to lie down, but it's only because they can't even stay standing anymore. And I don't want people to be able to get ahead of that damage. So anyway, the third one that you mentioned, which we're going to be talking more about because this is what your whole podcast is about, is continuous growth and learning, understanding how you can develop your healthy living, or what I call healthy deviant skills, to be able to rise to the challenges that most of us are facing today. You just can't learn them all at once, and they change from year to year. So it's a continuous learning process.
Right. And one of the things that's so wrong with all these other health books that they tried to get you to write is it takes this approach that we can just fix everything all at once. Number one, we're not broken, but the idea of fixing everything and
right.
Then it becomes so overwhelming. And a simple example I always tell like the clients that I work with is life is a continuum, and we need to quit looking at these like goals, 3 months I'm going to be here, like just live, know, because it goes up and down. And as soon as we can become like more pliable is a word I like, to just react,
I love that word.
To kind of just be. And that's really a lot coming from me if you knew me 5 years ago. But one example that just happened to me this morning, I woke up, New Year's Day, I don't drink anymore, but I did have some cake last night and I ate some bread, and I know what that does to me. I know. I mean, the experiment has been proven for a long time, but I thought it's fine, it's fine. And so I woke up this morning and I went downstairs, and my husband looked at me and he was cranky. I was like, "Why are you cranky?" And he's like, "Why are you cranky?" And I thought, well, I know why I'm cranky, because I had sugar. I had too much sugar last night. I know what it does to me. And he said, "Yeah, me too." And it was weird because I wasn't hungover, but it has the almost same mental drain on me as it used to when I would drink.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I had a choice. Like, we still had some food that, I could eat that would not make me feel good, or I could get right back on the food that I know makes me feel good. But it's weird that it's even a choice that we still battle with it. But I had to be so aware, like, Meredith, you don't feel good. For a fact that if you eat these next 3 meals or 4 meals, you will wake up tomorrow and feel like another human. And having that knowledge, just that's, I find, for me at least, is where I can create longer lasting change. I still don't have it perfect, but gosh, it's I feel empowered just talking to you right now, because I know I'm going to eat what I'm going to eat, when I go downstairs, which I didn't eat crap before talking to you, because honestly, I would feel like I was lying. If I had eaten like the Target clearance stuff before I talked to Pilar, I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, it's not even true. I'm a fraud," So,
anyway. I love that you could make me the assigned author of your own excellent judgment. I'll take the credit. Thank you. But it's interesting what you said. So 2 things I want to reflect on. One is, you said I'm not hungover, but obviously the way you felt was, there's a sugar hangover. I don't know, I'm assuming you weren't eating a gluten cake because you said you're gluten intolerant, but maybe you were, in which case you'd be doubly hungover from sugar and gluten. And I've been double whammied before by that combination, and it's terrible. I mean, and I can look hungover, right? I get the puffy eyes and the dark circles. I get that from drinking wine too, which I love. I still drink. Happily. I'm more of a wine and beer drinker, only gluten-free beer, of course. But if I do too much, I can see it the next day in my face. And sometimes I do it anyway because it's fun. But mostly what I've noticed is that 90% of the time, I'd rather not feel that way. It's too high of a price. At the times when I am making that decision, it's very interesting. So last night was New Year's Eve, and that's a socially sanctioned, encouraged time for us to overindulge and to get, have an altered State and party with people and say, what the heck, it's a holiday. And this is another example of how our society programs us to have these kinds of behaviors. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Look, I love to have a great time. And sometimes like hanging out with people and doing crazy fun things is all that I want to do. And I'm willing to pay the price the next day or the next week. But noticing what it is that makes me want to do that, in this case, a socially sanctioned programmed event like the year-end party of the year, whatever, or it's your birthday, or it's Christmas, or it's the holiday blah, blah party, it's the office special donut day, it's your kids' Halloween candy. Every week in this culture, there is something or some things. Happy hour happens every day. And it was designed for stressed out people getting off of work to like take their depleted, ragged selves and drag them into a bar where they can semi-anesthetize themselves on alcoholic beverages and some kind of junk food. And it's not, I mean, I'm partially joking, but I'm really not, because in truth, like everywhere we go, there is some version of this happening to us all day long, all year round. And we're either resisting it or we're recovering from it. And all of that takes energy. So this is part of why the healthy deviant mindset is, like I said, understanding what you're up against. And rather than being defeated by it, deciding to really embrace it like a foe, like a worthy foe. And you said something else, like a word, I think, pliable. You used the word pliable. I love that word. And I often talk about like meeting this foe of the unhealthy default reality, almost like you would a martial arts teacher, you know, who's like the kung fu guy that's going to like beat you to a bloody pulp while teaching you how to do jujitsu. And they just keep knocking you down and you have to keep getting back up. And like eventually you learn the martial art. And then it's like the teacher, when you can take the pebble from my hand, you know, or Kill Bill or something, it will be time for you to go. Or you know, taking a tango lesson from a really good tango teacher, it can be really intense and you can feel like you're losing or it's scary or you're off balance, but that's how you learn. And, you know, rather than seeing it as a fight or, you know, something that's you're up against and it's an enemy, I really look at the culture we're living in today as like, it's a teacher. It's helping me to become more aware. And it's inviting me to learn these skills of survival of the new era.
Well, and the key to that I've learned is the inner voice in your head, how you learn, how you respond to what you just learned. Because when you have a moment where you eat what you know doesn't agree with you, and you wake up the next morning, you feel like crap and the scale's up or whatever, the inner voice in your head has to be different in order to make that change matter. Like you can't say you're a piece of crap, you did this again, you have no willpower. You know, you can't say that. You have to say, okay, facts are you ate this, you feel bad, like let's not do it again. Like the inner voice is so important, I think, in this process.
Oh, I completely agree. Yeah, because, you know, part of what the unhealthy default reality does is absolutely set you up to feel like it's you, your failure, first of all, it's your problem, right? It's, you know, your weak-willed thing, you're being stupid, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, it's really the evolutionary's mismatch of being in a culture where our genetic programming doesn't match our social reality and where all of the encouragements are unhealthy ones. But beyond that, you know, thinking that you're the only one who's struggling and that you're stupid and bad is really, again, part of that vicious cycle where you then get down on yourself and feel ashamed, and where you begin to, you know, sense that there's no way out. And this is a dynamic that leads to what I call learned helplessness. Well, it's not just what I call it, it's what psychologists call it, where you try and you fail and you try and you fail to the point that you just start losing hope. And I want to turn that around for people, because so it's in the book. I have two different graphs. One is this sort of cycle of the unhealthy default reality, this vicious cycle. And the other is the cycle of a virtuous cycle of healthy deviance. And as we were talking about, it really begins with the amplified awareness of all of this. But then it leads to willingness rather than willpower. And that's another really important distinction. I think being willing to try again, being willing to experiment with some other approaches, being willing to be a little uncomfortable in the service of finding something out is much, much more useful than insisting on willpower and that you're just going to white knuckle your way through all kinds of misery and discomfort just because you got to prove that you're a good person. I mean, that's really thankless. And the willingness to me, really, that's where the transformation in my own life began, was imagining that it might be possible for me to be a healthy person and also feel free and be happy instead of,
Right.
you know, I would try to go on these diets or stick to these like crazy workout schemes. And when I would drop off of them, I would just feel like more and more hopeless and more frustrated with myself, and trying to do all of those good things that I quote unquote should be doing while also holding down a challenging career and being there for my family and trying to accomplish my personal goals, as you say, in this all in the same 24 hours, you know. I got to this point where I was so frustrated that I stomped my foot on the wood floor of my house and broke my foot. Just cracked my bone. And that to me was like, that's how much force of will, violent force of will, I was directing against my own self. And that really scared me. It's really what led me to, go, wow, if I could do this much damage to myself on an average day just by being frustrated, what is that energy doing to me the rest of the time? And what am I capable of? And I think that this is part of why people do drink and why they do resort to comfort food, or they do get addicted to things like, gambling or sex or shopping, is we're trying to anesthetize ourselves from a really painful place. And part of that pain comes from finding ourselves so wrong and inadequate in a society that would love nothing more than to convince us that we're inadequate, because then it can sell us more stuff. So I really think that moving from awareness into willingness leads into a whole bunch of other things in a positive cycle, that rather than taking you down into a cycle that takes you to like misery and learned helplessness, brings you up into a cycle of flow and discovery and like fascination. Like, okay, what just happened there? What might I do differently next time? Okay, what were the triggers? What do I need to be successful now? What skill am I missing? Who could I get that from? And so that's kind of been the road I've been on ever since, is just figuring out how I can bust out of the systems that have been busting me.
Yeah, I always call it the shit show autopilot, that we're just on this autopilot that's just a hot mess, and we're moving forward and we don't even know we're on it. And so that awareness is so very important. So you mentioned on the third, I didn't write it down, but that you wanted to talk about some of the tips that you might want to share with my audience that are from the book, as far as what are some of the actions we can maybe take to be a healthy deviant.
Absolutely. Well, in my book, I talk about, I mentioned the 3 nonconformist competencies, and for people that are interested in they want to put some of those into action, I suggest 3 renegade rituals in the book. And the basics of them are simple enough. I can describe them here. And then if people want to learn more, I can give you some podcasts and other free places that people can read and listen to them if they don't want to buy the book, which they certainly can. And that's all in there too.
Buy the book, everyone. Buy the book. She doesn't want to say that, but buy the book. I'll do it for
I would love that people buy the book, buy some for your friends. No, but truly, I know that not everyone can afford to buy books, or, in the libraries with new books, you can always ask for the book at your library, and they will generally order these books in. But sometimes there's a waiting list, and I don't want anyone to have to wait to begin experimenting. So the first renegade ritual is called the morning minutes. And I do this every day in some form. It's a base commitment of 3 minutes, no more. You can do more if you want, but you don't have to. And for 3 minutes after I wake up, before I look at my cell phone, before I turn on my computer, before I look at a newspaper or turn the news on, I light a candle. And I spend 3 minutes doing something that I genuinely enjoy. That's like a relatively low-key wake-up thing. And that could be just sitting and looking out the window, could be petting my dog, might be playing my guitar. Sometimes I will stretch or do some yoga, just like, a one sun salutation, or I will meditate for a few minutes. Sometimes I just look into the flame of the candle and kind of imagine what I want my day to go like. It could be anything. People read a little from a wisdom book or pick an oracle card if you have like an animal card or a wisdom card. But the idea is that you take these first 3 minutes for yourself. A couple of really interesting things happen. One is you'll run up against your own resistance. You're used to looking at your phone. You're used to flipping on the radio or a podcast. Like if you are used to doing these pattern behaviors, not doing them is surprisingly challenging. And that's very educational because it tells you that even taking 3 minutes for yourself to consciously do something that's really self-caring and self-building, how difficult that is. Imagine how hard it is for you to go change everything about your eating program and your activity. This is fun and easy, and you're still resisting doing it. The other really important thing about the morning minutes is that it actually takes advantage of a very special brainwave state known as the Theta State. Many of us have heard about like beta waves or delta waves. Delta is when you're sleeping. Beta activity in your brain is when you're awake and doing stuff and thinking, go do it thoughts. But theta is the space between sleeping and waking. And it's a very vulnerable time for your brain. It's also a very creative time. You have a lot of access to your subconscious mind. You're great at doing like visualizations and intention setting. But your brain is also very vulnerable to having outside messages implanted in your brain at this time, so suggestible or impressionable, which means when you flip on the news or open your social media, the entire world's agenda comes at you, and you're suddenly hit with bad news and social media, like likes. Who likes me? Who doesn't like me? What happened? Who's cuter than me? I need this product now. Okay. And, or people are suffering and dying in some place around the globe that I can't do anything about, but it still raises my adrenaline and cortisol and puts me into fight or flight mode. So when you do this morning minutes practice, you get 3 minutes to kind of come to waking and be your own pilot rather than having the autopilot of the unhealthy default reality hit you. And that little moment of autonomy and agency is sometimes all it takes to realize that you'd like to do more of your life from that conscious state. So the other two renegade rituals are kind of similar in that they're about checking in with yourself at various points in the day, taking breaks. Those are the Ultradian rhythm breaks, which I recommend doing a few of a day. Those are just really simple cycles of energy and fatigue that our bodies go through every day, and we fight them. We again, our programming in our society is that you get up in the morning and you go, 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 go until you fall asleep at night. But our bodies were never programmed to work that way. They all go through these cycles of oscillating energy. You're up and then you're down and then you're up. And typically you have about an hour and a half of productive time before you need about 20 minutes of rest. And that can just be a low-key switch of gears, or you can like sit down, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, go outside. And I write about this in the book at some length. If people want to know more about that renegade ritual, I always suggest listening to the Living Experiment podcast episode called Pause. And I just posted that up on my Facebook group page today, the Healthy Deviant Facebook group, if people want to listen to it, or they can find it in the archive at livingexperiment.com. But that explains in some detail how to do an Ultradian rhythm break. And then the third one is a nighttime wind down practice, which is really just kind of doing the same thing of taking advantage of lowering your energy level, lowering the lights in your house, lowering the volume on all the things going around you so that you can begin to ease into a nice sleep-ready state. And Meredith, here's a fun little experiment you could run tonight if you'd like. Part of my evening wind down practice is what I call evening ablutions. And ablutions is spelled ABL, ablutions, and it's an old-fashioned word for like self-anointing in a ritual way. So we all brush our teeth, hopefully, and we all wash our faces, hopefully, before we go to bed.
My 12-year-old boy. I don't know.
Maybe not. See if you might be interested in this. But I started experimenting with doing those things I do anyway before I go to bed more slowly and with lower light. So I sometimes bring a candle actually into the bathroom, but you can just lower the lights in the bathroom if that's possible, or try to use a low-key lamp rather than the bright overheads or fluorescents. And rather than rushing through those toilet activities, I just do them slowly and with self-care. So if I'm going to put lotion on, I put it on while I'm looking at myself kindly, and I put it on like I care about myself. When I'm brushing my teeth, I take real care to brush my teeth thoroughly and carefully. If you use a Sonicare, actually using the quad pacer on the darn Sonicare is astonishingly effective. You're supposed to be holding that toothbrush in the same place for 5 seconds at a time. My dental hygienist told me that, and I almost fell over. You're not supposed to be moving it around like some sort of crazy like rocket. But anyway, when you do these daily routines in a way that are slow, and you slow your breathing, you slow your heart rate, it's amazing how much more easily I can fall asleep, even with a few minutes of that kind of activity. Give it a try and let me know what you think.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for this, Pilar. This podcast is called The Same 24 Hours, as we've talked about. And I feel like this whole episode was about amazing things you do to contribute to your greatest health and happiness and success. But I like to ask my guest, what is one particular habit or ritual that you can really point to that you do in your 24 hours that helps you make the most of it? But you gave me so many.
Yeah.
But if there's another one.
Well, the version of it that I practice, I do all of those, but the Ultradian rhythm break practice that is built most heavily into my day, I walk my dog 3 times a day. But even if I didn't have my dog, I would now walk myself out to the mailbox and back 3 times a day. I live in a kind of a rural environment, and I've got about a 1 mile walk that I do. And when I take a mid-morning break to do that, do it after lunch, and then do it again in the mid-afternoon, I get all of my best ideas on those walks. Mm-hmm. My body stays fit, I think, almost entirely because of those walks, because when I was writing my book, I didn't work out at all. And I really don't think I lost much fitness because I was just remaining active and taking care of myself, and walking is a wonderful, just kind of a whole body exercise. But I think taking those breaks, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and really taking a break for lunch massively increases my productivity and my creativity while keeping my stress level down and keeping my health really good. That would be my suggestion.
Well, thank you so much. This was exciting, and we will look for your new book, The Healthy Deviant, and get on with our healthy deviants and raging against the clearance aisle.
Right on, and the autopilot. Yeah, and for folks who are interested, there's a fun little 5-day challenge I put together for the new year that just started, and people can still get in on it if they want to. They can find it at the Healthy Deviant Facebook group. That's a private group, but anybody can join. Or check out my social feeds to try to connect with the challenge invite. I'd love to have people join. I'm doing a live stream each day, but also sending folks these kinds of resources via email. And of course, you can find out more about my book at my website too, which is livingexperiment.com. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's a Living Experiment podcast. You can go there. Too, for the podcast. The book site is healthydeviant.com.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, and Happy New Year.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It was really fun talking with you. Happy New Year to you, too.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Same 24 Hours. Remember to rate, review, and share this podcast. It really matters. I appreciate it. See you next time.